Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. The doctor is in. And joining me today, my dear friend William.
Oh, cheer, Doc, and kia ora, cuzzies. This is the bro Willie, and I come from a town down south called Waihi. I feel real lucky that the doc asked me to come and give my 2 cents about the stories he's heard over the years. Oh, tu meke whānau.
Thank you, William, and well, as my friend stated, we will both be having a listen to some of my favourite stories involving real people in real crisis situations, how they individually and collectively deal with said situations and overcome them, or not. And after we've heard said stories, we will be taking a long, hard look at the whole, analysing and offering our opinions on the whole mess. So jolly good.
Oh, what else will we be looking at, Doc? Only I didn't bring my toolbox today.
Pardon me, William?
Oh, well, you said we'd be looking at holes.
No, William. We'll be looking at the whole story. The whole story.
Oh, we're looking at holes on the whole first story or the whole second story, Doc?
Right. Let's move on, shall we? Today's story is about a woman who seemingly has everything in life, and yet this just doesn't seem to satisfy what she feels is still missing. Will her quest to find this missing link finally leave her feeling satisfied, or in the end, will she find that she has lost even more than what she thought she was missing in the first place? Now, narrating our story today, my manservant Arthur. Arthur, if you please.
Very good, sir. My name is Jonathan, or Johnny for short, and I've been married to Victoria, or Vicky as I like to call her, for 28 years. Our 28th year marked an ending, but also a beginning. This was the year our third and youngest child went off to college. We just saw her off, and so have officially become empty nesters. I wanted to use this opportunity to try to revive Vicky and I's personal life, which had steadily languished during our marriage, largely due to lack of energy and lack of privacy. As working class people, we have a small house with thin walls, not a huge mansion with nannies and maids. I thought that everything was going according to plan so far, and that my further future plans would succeed. As soon as we got home, I carried Vicky upstairs, and despite her protests of being too tired from the road and not feeling fresh, I had sex with her. She seemed to enjoy it, and I hoped it was a small taste of things to come. After all this time, I was still passionately in love with my wife, and still lusted after her like a hormonal teenager. At 48 years old, she still works up my appetite. Vicky is a nurse, and was in training when we met. Between the births of our children, and then the time and money constraints of raising them, Vicky remained a general nurse. Over the years, she had experienced and commented on more than one occasion about young, youthful nurses coming in fresh out of school, taking the basic courses and getting promoted, or rather, getting promoted instead of her. To say that she was outraged by this would be like saying that the Pope was slightly Catholic. After some pretty impressive sex, I was introduced to what was obviously a well thought out plan on her part. Vicky said that there was a chronic shortage of paediatric nurses at the hospital where she works, and that a very specific, very intensive 6-month training course on offer would allow her to remain employed at the same hospital. She knew for sure that the head nurse of the same department in another hospital in the city would retire in 2 years, and she would be able to apply for this vacancy. This, in turn, would put Vicky in a prime position to succeed her current hospital's matron when she retires in 5 years. This is the main prize that Vicky has her eye on. She did her research and found out that she would be paid during the 6 months of training, so there would be no burden on my modest income, and her eventual increased salary would help us achieve our goal of retiring at 60 with a comfortable bank account. I looked at Vicky, amazed at this newfound ambition on her part. It was like seeing her for the first time, both exciting and scary. Exciting because I realised how much my wife is still capable of surprising me, and scary because of how she's worked everything out to the smallest detail, and yet I'm only just now hearing about it for the first time. Why didn't she ask me for my advice, my help, my input? Why did she feel the need to hide these hopes, dreams and plans from me? Especially since I've always encouraged her, no matter what. Even now, as a seed of anxiety started growing inside of me, I was still firmly inclined to support her dream. That was until the reason for her reticence became clear. The only place Vicky could take this course was in another state, which was a 2-hour flight away. I voiced my concerns about how 6 months is quite a long time and questioned if they offered anything closer or even online. She replied that there's nothing closer and this course was not offered online, and tried to reassure me that 6 months is not such a long time in the grand scheme of things, using the example of wartime couples who had to part ways out of duty and got by only on letters to each other for years. She further solidified her stance by stating that the time would simply fly by and that I could afford to fly to where she is once a month at least to spend time with each other. I was just silent, turning over questions and any possible answers in my mind. Before I could voice any objections or even ask further questions, Vicky saw the doubt written all over my face and suddenly changed tactics, becoming seemingly enraged and accusing me of being arrogant. This made me wince. When had I ever shown arrogance? Not with her, not with our daughters, not with anyone in any circumstance or situation. I was so offended that I almost missed the rest of her outrage. She bluntly stated that if it was about me and my career, the whole world would expect her to support and encourage me without question, but since she was a woman, she was just selfish for wanting support from me in her own dreams. Selfish? Where was this coming from all of a sudden? I'd never had any reason to ever see her as such, as I had always seen her as one of the most selfless people I had ever known. I barely had a chance to get a word in edgewise. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to remain calm as anger never leads to anything good. I reassured her that I didn't, nor did I ever see her as selfish, and that I wasn't trying to make her feel bad for following her dreams. However, she has had a long time to think about this, while I have only just found out about it in literally the last 10 minutes, never mind having actual time to think it over. Vicky immediately took on an air of remorse. Her tone changed from harsh to neutral as she explained further that housing a student nurse and working in a teaching hospital would keep the depletion of our pension funds to a minimum. Flying back every month or more for 6 months just wouldn't be practical given how busy she would be. But it would definitely be possible and far more practical for me to fly to where she is once a month or so to spend a weekend together. It all sounded reasonable, but I had to say that the obvious, palpable differences between my plans for the immediate future alongside Vicky's own plans were hard to come to terms with, leaving me feeling confused, unsure, and vulnerable. Vicky began nibbling on my ear, initiating a welcome second round and effectively forcing me to swallow any question or reservation I might still have. Ask any sex-starved guy, if they were to find themselves in such a situation, would they not also agree to almost anything? So of course, I gave my blessing for Vicky to attend the course. The last bomb exploded as she hurriedly climbed aboard me. As it turns out, the course would commence from the following week. After that, my well-thought-out questions meant nothing. After all, had I not already given my blessing? I felt like I was being manipulated.
If I could interrupt for a minute, but in terms of first impressions, this man seems a little soft. One might even go so far as to say that he's a wee bit of a Nancy.
Oh, come on, Doc. There's no need for name-calling. He seems like a pretty on-to-it fella. Really puts his missus on a pedal. He really puts her right up there, you know. Like he really has a lot of aroha for his waihi in there. Kind of like the aroha I have for my own wife, you know.
And I can understand that, William, absolutely. But what I'm saying is it wouldn't hurt anything if he put his foot down a little more, you see. Show a little more assertiveness. Actually act like the man in the relationship.
I can kind of see what you're saying, Doc, but I guess I've just always been more of a lover than a fighter, you know.
And that is admirable, William. Most admirable indeed. Now, should we return to the story, Arthur?
Of course, sir. When the next week came, Vicky left after a flurry of activities and preparation, looking like a child going to her first camp. She was so excited that she barely remembered to kiss me goodbye. I'm ashamed to admit it, but I had a hard time getting into the new daily routine. For many years, I didn't have to think about what I would do in my free time. I'm guilty of leaving the planning of our social life to Vicky. I was content to leave her in charge of that aspect of our lives, so long as we always made time for family. I'm not alone in this, however, since that same dynamic applies to most of the guys I work with. Most of Vicky's evenings and weekends, excluding the children, were filled with activities that she organised and devoted to us. I concentrated on the necessary things in life, like mowing the lawn, washing the cars, driving the children to and from sporting events. Now, from 6 in the evening when I came home from work, until 10 or 11 at night, I was lonely and bored. It's not that I was used to going somewhere all the time, because we never did that. But now, there was no one to talk to when the newscaster informed us of yet another stupid mistake one of our politicians had made. No one to hold hands and laugh with while we were watching one of our favourite shows. I even missed giving her foot rubs, despite my many mock complaints for having to indulge her in that fashion. During the first week of Vicky's absence, we talked for 30 minutes in the evenings. I have to admit, I wondered if she had taken our rising phone bill into account when she was planning and budgeting for her out-of-state course. I also have to admit that I felt jealous. She was clearly busy and enjoying the new challenge. She dominated our conversations, telling me all about it. Her excitement was palpable. The names of people I didn't know were mentioned nonchalantly. It made me feel rejected, like I had no place at this point in her life. At the same time, our conversations always ended very nicely and gave me hope. Perhaps her absence will strengthen our hearts, and when she returns, we can continue my plans to resume our fuller sex life. By the second week, our 30-minute evening conversations had dropped to 20 minutes because Vicky said she needed to study and our conversations were throwing her out of her nursing mindset. It was painful. Now I was reduced to the level of an intrusive interloper. I tried to always end our conversations on a loving note, but by the end of the week it started to feel a little one-sided. However, I tried to remain encouraging and supportive, keeping my frustrations and loneliness to myself. In the third week, she asked that we call only once every 2 evenings, and oddly enough, she suggested that she be the one to call me, and not vice versa. This way, she said, I won't distract her at inconvenient times. In the fourth week, I only received 2 calls. I tried to be understanding about this. She had had her first serious assignment, and she was working the evening shift, but it was difficult. I was glad for the upcoming trip I would make to see her on the following weekend. I missed her. I missed us. Fate, however, had other plans. My planned trip had to be cancelled at the last minute because Vicky said that there was a flu outbreak and the hospital was inundated with patients and cases. In the teaching hospital, everyone worked as if they were working in a mine, it seemed. This weekend did pay some dividends, however. While gassing up my car, I met an old friend, Marcus, who I'd lost touch with over the years. He and a group of his buddies played poker every Saturday night at the local pub. He invited me to join them, and given that I was tired of being out of work and forgotten by my wife, I accepted the invitation. The company was pleasant. We played a few friendly games in the back room, and then headed to the bar for a relaxing mug of ale. After years of my social life consisting of neighbourhood barbecues, small local family-style bistros, and kid-friendly events, the pub was something of a revelation. I was stunned by the number of single ladies, my age or slightly younger, who boldly approached me and, frankly, tried to pick me up. It's funny how, after a few years of marital bliss and diapers, you forget that these things happen in bars. It took 3 Saturdays and a number of other days of the week for it to become clear that Vicky would not be calling me on those particular evenings, so I made the most of them. I was having a drink with Marcus during another one of our now regular pub nights and expressed my curiosity about being hit on so often. He answered my question with another question, asking me if I noticed that, at our age, there are already noticeably more single women than single men. He continued, stating that these women were made up of widows and divorcees. The divorcees were even more diverse, either being abandoned by their ex-husbands for a younger model, abandoning or being abandoned due to midlife crisis, or, most commonly, infidelity, either by her or by her ex-husband. I assured him that I understood this, but what I was really curious about was why I was the one being hit on specifically, since I didn't exactly see myself as any sort of prize, not to mention the fact that I was married. Marcus rolled his eyes in frustration and stated that I had been married so long that my confidence as a man was inextricably tied to what my wife thinks and says about me. He told me to take a look in the mirror and then have a look around again, because I look a damn sight better than most of the available options. I was speechless for a while. It's true, the physical nature of my work kept me lean and muscular. Marcus then pointed out the fact that I didn't currently have a wife constantly worrying over where I was or what I was doing, and neither did I have kids at home to watch over anymore, and that if I dared to take my wedding ring off, he guaranteed that I'd be sleeping with one of these single women within 2 hours without using a single chat-up line or buying a single drink. At that, I looked around and noticed more than one hungry look cast in my direction. Marcus followed my gaze, also observing the wolves ready to pounce any minute, but I sternly told him that I could never, ever cheat on Vicky. He told me that he understood, but that half of the women in the pub tonight were probably married themselves and just looking for a man for a fling, noting how they were dressed to kill. He stated that the same could probably be said for half the guys in the pub as well, before pulling my attention to a particular table where a sad-looking woman of about 40 sat, surrounded by 5 friends. This sad woman was probably one of the aforementioned divorcees who had just been exchanged for a younger model and was now being consoled by her friends. I could guarantee that she would be back in a few weeks wanting to get laid in order to convince herself that she's still attractive and that it's all her ex-husband's fault, or simply to get revenge by fighting fire with fire. I guess if I wanted a quickie I could come back then, if I were that way inclined, or simply hide my wedding ring the next time one of the cougars came over. I guess it all depended on what I was after. I suppose I even had options if I were looking for something more long-term, as I regarded a table Marcus' gaze had suddenly stopped on. A table where 4 ladies around my age were sitting. They were laughing and having a great old time. From what I saw, it looked like 2 of them had wedding rings on and 2 didn't. As Marcus and I watched, it was clear that 3 of them were scanning the room. Now this is where I'd be looking if I was single. This is a group of work friends who decided to have a good time together. 2 of them are married, but apparently that didn't stop one of them searching for her next prey. The other 2 are lonely, but not desperate. They may take advantage if an opportunity presented itself, but they won't seek to create opportunities themselves. At that moment, my cell phone buzzed with an incoming text message from Vicky, where she was apologising and explaining that she was working and couldn't take a break to call me. I tried to be grateful that she bothered to write a message, but it wasn't easy. Since the calls and texts became less and less frequent the longer she'd been gone, it was difficult to feel grateful. But at least she didn't forget to end with the words, "love you." It was more than her last 2 messages. I responded with a quick, "love you too," before looking at Marcus to continue. At that moment, he turned to me with a mischievous look in his eye and dared me to take my wedding ring off, go to the part of the bar closest to their table and order myself a drink. He had something to prove, and he was willing to use me to prove his point. Giving an exaggerated sigh of exasperation, I did as he suggested. Leaning against the counter, waiting to be served, I watched what was happening out of the corner of my eye. My elbows had been resting on the bar for barely a minute when one of the married women jumped up, tucking her ring into her pocket. She rather boldly asked if she could buy me a drink, but lost interest as soon as I said I was married. I have to admit, I also told her that I just saw her take off her wedding ring. She had the decency to blush at least. The others at her table were watching what was happening, and before she could leave, one of the unmarried women approached me. She reached me just as the bartender was taking my order, then waited for my drink to arrive before placing her own order. I looked back at their table and saw that everyone's glasses were at least half full, so I wasn't surprised when my new neighbour at the bar said hello and struck up a polite conversation. A quick glance told me she wasn't exactly my type, and my body language must have given me away because she soon returned to her table with a round of drinks. I continued to sip my drink, waiting for Marcus to return from the restroom so that I could tell him how right he was, when I heard a quiet "hello" from behind me. Turning around, I saw the second unmarried woman from the table looking at me confidently. With my newfound understanding of the overall dynamic, I guessed that she was creating an opportunity, but wouldn't be upset if it didn't work out. If I was single, this girl would definitely interest me. It was difficult to determine her age. She could be either my age or 5 to 10 years younger. Attractive, slim but not overly so, soft honey-toned hair curling around her face, and a genuine smile. I looked at her ring finger, but didn't see an untanned mark, then looked at mine. Because of my job, I only wore the ring when going out, so there was no mark on my finger either. Tradition required that I offer her a drink. "No need," she said, picking up her glass and carefully tilting it this way and that before taking a sip. There was a confidence in her voice that was very attractive. She is clearly a woman who is comfortable in her own skin. Then we started a casual conversation about everything under the sun. 10 minutes later, I had to admit to her that I was actually married, even though I didn't have a ring on. I could have lied about where it was and why it was in my pocket, but something forced me to be completely honest with Angela, which, as it turned out, was the name of this attractive blonde. She questioned me about my behaviour, which at first glance was mean and dishonest. I defended myself, stating that one of her friends came up to me not 20 minutes ago and was so forward that she didn't even try to be subtle as she took off her rings and stuffed them into her pocket. She told me that the woman's name was Kathy and that they weren't really friends, that they had just met this evening and that she had come with Steph, the other unmarried woman, who was in fact her friend. They all worked together and she herself couldn't believe Kathy's actions and felt a little sorry for her husband. I nodded my agreement and told her that I had taken mine off not because I wanted to have some fun outside of marriage, but because I was testing my buddy Marcus's theory about why women our age frequent bars. Angela laughed a lot when I explained Marcus' theory in detail. She agreed with him for the most part. Then the conversation turned to Vicky and how she is 2 months into a 6-month course out of state. I admitted that I felt kinda lost without her and that I miss her terribly, following up with how busy she is with work and study, how we don't get to talk often, which is why I come here, being tired of sitting alone and staring at the 4 walls of our living room. Angela seems to perk up, but I also sense an air of suspicion as she questions if I'm really just here for company and conversation and not hookups and one-night stands. I was somewhat shocked by her frank question, but I reiterated that not only am I a married man, I'm also strictly monogamous. This being the case, does it mean that I can't enjoy female communication and conversations? Of course not. This isn't off limits for me. Angela clearly approves of my answer, and so our conversation continued. Talking to Angela was very easy. She told how she and her husband invested so much in their children while they were growing up that, when the nest was empty, they became practically strangers. 6 months ago, they decided to split amicably, and Angela enjoyed the freedom. But if the right guy came along, she didn't rule out the possibility of a relationship. We ended up chatting for over an hour. Finally, it became obvious that her friends were leaving. I saw Angela debating whether to stay or not, but in the end, she decided to leave. I took the fact that she even considered staying as a compliment because, knowing that there was no prospect of a relationship with me, she must have simply enjoyed my company and conversation. After Vicky's rejections, this was refreshing. Vicky's phone calls became even more infrequent and shorter. We talked for 5 to 10 minutes, twice a week. I consciously developed a new relaxed attitude towards life, partly to keep my sanity. There's no point in fighting. Vicky isn't interested. A couple of times when I mentioned the waning calls, she told me to stop being such a child and to stop making her life difficult with my insecurities. After all, is she not in the same boat? Doesn't she have enough worries without my whining? My protests, denials that I was whining, and that I was simply stating facts went unheard. And as punishment, I didn't hear from her for 5 days. I refused to be unhappy, and I was tired of feeling frustrated and powerless and at Vicky's beck and call. So I started going to the bar several times a week just to chat with people and socialise. My proposed visit to Vicky the following weekend was going to be inconvenient as she had assignments. That was painful. We'd been apart for 10 weeks and I found myself an inconvenience. I felt like I wasn't that important to her. She clearly didn't make any effort to find time for me, for us. During the last 3 conversations, she didn't even bother to ask what I'd been up to, how I'd been keeping busy. When the following week she announced that she was suffering from heavy periods and wasn't in the mood to host me, I wasn't surprised. The next evening, I broke protocol and called her on her cell phone. One of her roommates answered her phone and said that Vicky took sleeping pills and went to bed, leaving her phone with her friend for peace of mind. In the meantime, I was quite happy with my social life. It was much better than sitting at home waiting for phone calls that invariably never came. The lack of phone calls made me feel like a love-struck teenage loser sitting by the phone. I joined the Thursday night darts competition as one of the teams had a player transferred to another state, and I also enjoyed the Tuesday quiz nights a lot more than I ever thought I would. I met new and interesting people of both sexes, always telling single ladies that I was married and not interested in cheating. I often saw Angela, always coming up to chat when she was there with her friends. She started spending some time with a guy and recognised that he was interesting enough to start a relationship with. However, this only lasted 2 weeks before he disappeared. According to her, she couldn't withstand his constant sexual demands, so he left. This suited her. It failed the severity test. We were very careful to avoid serious conversations about Vicky and my relationship, and Angela never once expressed her opinion about Vicky or her behaviour, which was fine with me. I was angry at my wife and her complete disregard for me. We hadn't seen each other for 14 weeks, and phone calls continued to be rare and short. Worse, when we did talk, I felt like I was imposing on her. Of course she's busy. Sure, she had taken on the difficult task of juggling work and school, but did that mean I should be cast aside, forgotten like a pair of old worn-out shoes? Could regular, short conversations and texting really be that detrimental to achieving her goals? The more time I spent with Angela, the more I liked her. She was warm and friendly, funny and smart. I even liked it when she asked me to help her in certain situations. It made me feel useful. For instance, when she would approach a new guy at the bar, or someone would approach her, I would wait for her signal. If she wasn't interested, but had a hard time breaking the contact, she'd give me a sign. I'd walk over, kiss her on the cheek, and give the guy a hint that we were a couple. He'd move himself to other possible opportunities, and I would chat with Angela until he left the bar, just to be sure. What bothered me is how intensely I was looking forward to talking to her. She was an excellent conversationalist. We actually talked. There was no flirting, unless you consider discussing Pepsi versus Coca-Cola as flirting. There was never anything inappropriate, and yet I couldn't deny I felt disappointed if I didn't see her in my evenings. For the first time in my life, I came to see how easily one might be seduced into an affair. Suddenly, old cliches like, "my wife doesn't understand me," or "my wife ignores me," started to make a bit of sense. It's not that I think cheating is normal in certain circumstances, but I have a whole new understanding of how a person can slip into cheating. I was tempted, very tempted. It was a situation I never thought I would find myself in, and with each passing day, my ability to resist temptation grew increasingly weaker. So far, I'd managed to control myself and not correspond with Angela in a way that could be considered inappropriate for a married man, but I was no saint or eunuch. With daily reminders of Vicky's indifference, I didn't know how much longer I could hold out. I wondered if Vicky was experiencing the same thoughts and feelings, but almost immediately dismissed the possibility. She's too busy with work and school to miss me. Not to mention, she doesn't have time to seduce another man. However, we were only halfway through her training course, and I knew I had to do something or our marriage would be ruined, and long before the 6 months were up, and I finally gave in to my baser urges. Something I never thought I would be capable of. I decided to call Vicky, despite our agreement that I would wait for her to be available to call me. She answered the call, and one of the first things out of her mouth was how she couldn't talk for long. I held back my irritation at this, as I knew that anger wouldn't do me any good. I told her how aware I was becoming of how she seemed to be too busy for us these days, but that I needed her to find time now, adding somewhat sarcastically that I would be brief. I heard her sigh of impatience and swallowed a little more irritation. I got straight to the point and pointed out how she didn't seem to have time for me anymore, how the calls are becoming less and less frequent, and how, even when we do talk, she treats me as if I'm bothering her. How she denies my feelings, my needs, and how it's like she's forgotten that there are two people in our marriage. Yes, I'm here to love, support, and encourage her, but I also deserve some time and attention. If I was hoping my words would get through to her, I was out of luck. She became irate, commenting on how she had spent her entire adult life putting the family first, how it was her time, her turn now. She made it sound like I didn't put our family first. like I didn't sacrifice or compromise for my family when I'd given up a lot. In every way, I put her and the children first. Since she brought it up, I asked her when it was my turn, because I think I missed it. I was probably too busy with work to notice. She then questioned how I could dare to imply that she wasn't working and giving her all to our family as well, calling me ignorant, and that was just the tip of the iceberg, as I ignored her for the next 6 or so seconds, as I didn't want to have the memory of the insults I knew were spewing out of her mouth. When she ran out of steam, I tried again, finally stating that our marriage is in trouble, asking how she couldn't see that. If everything remains as it is, or, God forbid, degrades even more, we won't have a marriage at all by the time she finishes this course. All she replied was that she was tired of my whining and my guilt-tripping, telling me to grow up. I couldn't be bothered to hear the rest of her diatribe, so I hung up. This must have pricked her conscience, because she immediately called back, apologising, but also asking me to understand how important this was to her. That she needed this, that our marriage was fine. I couldn't argue with her further. She hadn't listened to a word I'd said. She continued, telling me that she missed me terribly too, and that she was sorry that I was having a hard time without her, but that in the long run it would be good for us, that I would see. How we're already halfway there, and when she returns, she'd put the house in order and I could eat normally again. Her tone took me by surprise. She sounded condescending. I felt like a child being scolded. Yes, it was hard for me without her, but not in the way she thought. She seemed to think I was incapable of taking care of myself. I looked around the room. It looked the same as always, clean, neat, and organised. I coped well with everyday activities. My clothes are washed, the fridge is stocked, the floors and countertops are clean, the dishes are washed. She didn't understand at all what was going on. I miss intimacy and communication. I miss my wife, my friend, my life partner. After 28 years, our lives were intertwined in every aspect, and her absence felt like a part of me had been cut off. I made a sound that she seemed to interpret as agreement. She quickly stated that she was glad we'd sorted this out, and that it was really time for her to go. The next thing I heard on the other line was a dial tone. She'd hung up on me, once again forgetting to tell me that she loved me. I took my keys and went to the pub. Perhaps a cold ale will soothe my disappointment. Halfway through my first glass, I realised I'd made a mistake coming out. I wasn't in the mood to interact or talk with people. I was hurt and angry. Anxiety, resentment, disappointment. My gut is filled with too many emotions. They churned in my stomach, like my clothes in the washing machine. Even Angela's friendly smile couldn't lift my spirits. I finished my last beer and beat a hasty retreat, giving a quick goodbye and heading for home. As soon as I entered the door, I received an SMS on my phone. "Are you okay? You weren't yourself today, and I was worried. Call me if you need someone to talk to." I stared at the message. There were unshed tears in my eyes. The woman I had known for only 2 months cared more about my well-being than my own wife of 28 years. I sat down on the sofa, and for the first time since meeting Angela, I didn't know how to answer her. I was scared. Had we gotten too close? Had I been unwittingly having an emotional affair? Until now, we had never talked about Vicky or the state of my marriage, and I hadn't told her anything I'd be embarrassed to admit to my wife. But I knew I had to be careful. So I replied, "I'm fine. Just a bad day. See you on Thursday if you're at the pub. Take care, Johnny." I stared at the text for a long time, checking and double-checking that it was casual enough before hitting send. I heated up the leftovers and ate them while standing at the sink. As I ate, I realised that neither Vicky nor myself had mentioned my scheduled visit the following weekend. She hadn't said anything regarding availability, so I decided to book a spontaneous plane ticket for next Friday. I couldn't wait another week to see my wife. I needed to see her face, hear her laugh, and smell her hair, to remind myself how much I loved her. Although the possibility of Vicky misbehaving while away never occurred to me, I decided to make my visit a surprise. This way, she wouldn't be able to brush me off again. Finally, Friday came. I left work early and went straight to the airport. Everything went smoothly, and by 6 in the evening, I showed up on Vicky's doorstep. The door was answered by a girl whose voice I recognised. This was Courtney, the girl who had answered Vicky's call that one day. She led me into their small living room and explained that Vicky and their other housemate Emma weren't home from school yet. When I took my phone out of my pocket, she waved me off, saying she'd call Vicky. She had what I thought was a worried look on her face. Before she had time to press 3 buttons, the sound of a key was heard at the front door. Vicky seemed pleasantly surprised to see me, and after a quick kiss, she ran off to the toilet. I thought it was strange that she took her phone with her, but since Courtney seemed to be staying particularly close to and almost shadowing me, I didn't comment. She and I were having a rather awkward conversation while waiting for Vicky, who seemed to be in the bathroom for a long time. Before she had time to return to the hallway, she rushed down the corridor to her room, telling me to continue talking to Courtney, who seemed to relax, after which our conversation became a little less tense. After my evenings in the pub, the 20-something year age difference didn't bother me. While we were chatting, I saw Vicky take a load of sheets to the laundry room and come back with fresh ones. I smiled. Was she trying to impress me, like she did when we were first dating? When the room was apparently tidy to Vicky's satisfaction, she invited me to shower and freshen up with her before we went out. Despite the frosty air, Vicky opened the window in her room, which seemed strange to me, since I knew that she hated the cold. After more than 3 months of absence, seeing Vicky naked, water cascading down her broad breasts, I could barely contain myself. I pushed a little for intimacy, but was told to wait until after dinner for dessert. It was late, and Vicky was hungry. We managed to get to a nice seafood restaurant that she'd told me about. As she laughed at my lame jokes, I decided that my decision to surprise her was the right one. We had a lovely time with 2 bottles of a good Riesling between us. But one detail marred the evening, a detail that made this evening only good instead of great. Vicky kept interrupting our conversations to read and then reply to text messages. I debated whether to talk about this since we have taught our children that such behaviour is rude. At the risk of ruining the evening, I brought it up. She told me that I knew she wouldn't normally mess around with her phone at the dinner table, but being that she is one of the older students, some of the younger ones look up to her like a mentor, and with this explanation, she replied to another message. In between devouring salmon and texting, she asked how long I intended to stay, since she had 2 tasks to complete over the weekend. I tried to ignore the sinking feeling in my gut, brought about by her question. I barely had time to arrive, and she was already putting me on a plane home? Despite wanting to be alone with Vicky, I took my time at dinner, courting her as if we were young lovers again, rather than an old married couple who knew each other inside and out. Finally, by the time we walked hand in hand the 7 or so blocks to her student housing, it was already 11 o'clock. There was a second car in the driveway that Vicky said belonged to Emma, who, I learned, worked as a waitress to pay for her courses and usually finished around 10. The apartment was quiet, only the hallway light was on when we entered. After dinner and wine, not to mention our previous shower, I was on edge. The time for courtship had passed. I picked my wife up in my arms, carried her to her room, and threw her on the bed. After 15 weeks of abstinence, I fought the urge to just take her roughly. Normally, I would have done this, but there was a strange atmosphere that had been lurking on the edge of consciousness all evening. It seemed like we were strangers. The conversation during dinner and our walk were slightly strained, as if we didn't have as much in common as we did just 4 months ago. Taking her roughly implied familiarity. I felt the same as when we first met. In short, I felt the need to impress and satisfy. So, as Vicky lay on the bed, tired and a little tipsy, I tore off her panties and did the same with her top. She was slightly taken aback, left off balance, which allowed me to quickly undress. As we began, Vicky started to jerk and moan loudly. It was a far cry from the Vicky that I knew, the one who had always been a little reserved sexually. I always attributed her reticence to her strict Catholic upbringing, this and having 3 children. This new Vicky was having fun and didn't care who knew about it. I was in uncharted territory when she went limp like a rag doll. Her recovery and pulling me to her chest was all the hint I needed. I think she missed our sex life as much as I did during our separation. I was in 7th heaven. However, they say that heaven and hell is separated by a thin membrane the thickness of a molecule. I think this is true. Just before I completely lost myself to my bestial lust, there was an impatient knock on the flimsy inner bedroom door. An unfamiliar female voice shouted clearly, "Vicky, Doug, for God's sake, 3 nights in a row? I need to get some sleep." It was the verbal equivalent of a bucket of ice water. With a flash of realization, it's as if everything suddenly made sense. Her seemingly new attitude and behaviour in terms of sex, the strangeness between us, the reduction of phone calls, opposition every time I suggested coming to visit, a sudden change of bed linens, even her disappearing into the bathroom for an awkward amount of time when she first came home and found me there. I could well imagine her in the toilet now, whispering to her boyfriend about a change of plans. Was it really him that she was texting the whole time we were in the restaurant? I looked into her eyes and saw horror in them. I saw the reflection of a man who knew he had to say something, and quickly, but didn't know what words to use to save this disastrous situation. I looked down at her. Her hair was a mess, and her makeup was smeared. The legs that I once considered the longest and most beautiful on the planet suddenly disgusted me. Her whole appearance disgusted me. Now she looked like who she was, an adulteress, a traitor. Now I saw only the traitor. Instinctively, I knew I had to get out of there before my caveman instincts took over and I did harm. She wasn't worth going to prison over. Quickly putting on my scattered clothes, I was left with only an unpacked carry-on bag that needed to be closed up. The entire time I was doing this, I avoided looking at her. I just couldn't. My self-control was weak enough without being spurred on by her depraved appearance. Vicky clearly didn't realise how close I came to giving in to my resentment, my pure white-hot rage over her betrayal, how close I came to physically harming her when she started yelling at me. I perceived her words only vaguely. 6 months is a long time, and she'd only been gone 15 weeks, and I suspect her to have been cheating since at least a few weeks ago. What about me? Wasn't I also alone for the same amount of time? Her excuses were weak, just like her restraint. All the other students are having fun with each other. They made me feel young and free again, not someone on the threshold of being a grandmother. How many of those students have husbands or wives waiting for them at home? Thanks for telling me and confirming there's more than just good old Doug. The last words from her mouth that were clear to me were that we can overcome this. No. No, we can't. As I left her presence, her screams became louder and more desperate. From the other side of the door, I heard an increasingly worried voice. Finally, suitcase in hand, boots untied and not once glancing over my shoulder, I opened the door. It almost hit me in the face as it was pushed from the outside at the same time that I was pulling from the inside. As a result, I found myself face to face with a young woman who I guessed was Emma. Over her shoulder, I saw Courtney with a deer in headlights look on her face. As I walked past my wife's housemates towards the front door, I heard Emma yell, "Who the hell are you?" Opening the door, I called over my shoulder, "I'm Vicky's ex-husband," emphasizing ex, and slammed it shut, disappearing into the night. I had a plane to catch, a lawyer to meet, a marriage to end, a sad story to tell family and friends, a broken heart to mend, and a honey blonde to get to know better at the pub.
Oh dear, what an absolute mess this woman has made of her marriage. Whatever was she thinking?
Oh, I'll say, Doc, that fella didn't deserve that no way, no how. That woman ain't nothing but a bloody hungy pants out.
I'm sorry, William, she's a what?
Oh, hungy pants, Doc. You know her pants are on fire from all the action.
I see, a honey pants. How fascinating.
Oh, never mind that, Doc. I'm keen to see what's gonna happen next, eh?
Jolly good show, William. And, speaking of, shall we get on with the show, Arthur?
Very good, sir. Now we'll hear the story from the perspective of Vicky. I jumped in surprise when Johnny answered the phone, half expecting the call to go to voicemail like all the other calls I'd made over the past 4 days. "What do you want, Victoria? I'm busy and I can't speak for long." Despite all my attempts to get through to him, all the things I thought I would say when he finally picked up, I found I was speechless. His tone was flat, neutral, emotionless. This confused me. He sounded neither heartbroken nor furious, which is what I was prepared for. I wasn't ready for seeming indifference, as if I'm nothing more than acquaintance. In the silence that followed, I heard his sigh of impatience. It sounded loud, and I panicked, afraid he would hang up. "Victoria, I don't have all day. As I said, I'm busy. It's quiz night. Quiz night? How could that make him busy? How could he prioritise that over our marriage? These words, these questions came out of my mouth before I could filter them. I wouldn't expect you to understand how important this is to me, Victoria. This is something I've come to expect from you. I winced as I remembered our previous conversations over the past 3 months. Part of me was ashamed of these conversations, but having Johnny throw them in my face again made me angry. I told him that I wished he wouldn't belittle our marriage like this, and that we needed to talk, but I may as well not have spoken. Listen, I have to go. The team relies on my knowledge of history. I can't let them down. Let's talk later. I looked at my phone in disbelief, as if the screen was lying about the fact that Johnny had just hung up on me. The wine I drank to calm my nerves before the call turned to vinegar in my stomach, leaving a sour taste in my mouth. I reflected, regretting my decision to stay rather than fly home immediately. I shouldn't have given Johnny time to cool down. I should have chased him, naked if I had to. So what stopped me? I analysed it. Fear, nerves, guilt, shame, and of course not wanting to hear him call me every vile name under the sun. All of this played a role in some form or another, but admittedly the training course also played an important role. I had an important exam at the end of the module on Monday, and no matter what, I hadn't wanted to give up 3 months of hard work. Yes, I'd had a lot of fun while I was away, but I also worked a lot and didn't want it to be in vain. Over the weekend, I used the need to study for an exam as a way to distract myself between several attempts to call Johnny. The exam was yesterday. I still haven't booked a ticket home yet, realising that I'm delaying it. Somehow, encountering Johnny in our own home made it seem more real, and for some reason I had it in my head that the house was Johnny's territory and the student housing was mine, as unlikely as that actually was. I'd hoped that Johnny would return so we could talk on my turf. I lowered my head into my hands. It was hard to face reality. 4 days have passed. Johnny wasn't going to come back to confront me. I looked at my phone again and saw that Doug had left me several messages. I ignored the temptation to open them. This was also really difficult. The time on the screen showed that it was already 7 o'clock. It's too late to ask the course coordinator for time off. I'll have to wait until morning. I hoped that I wouldn't have to explain in detail why I needed time off, as that would be awkward. Of course, it would be enough to say that I have family matters to attend to. Putting the phone in my pocket, I walked into the kitchen and looked in the pantry and sighed. Everything on offer seemed like too much work, and besides that, I had no appetite anyway, so I went back to my room, lay down on the bed, and stared at the ceiling. I closed my eyes, but sleep didn't come. My brain wouldn't turn off. How can I make Johnny understand that my absence these past few months is something completely separate from him, from us? Something parallel, not opposite. How can I make him understand that our marriage was never in jeopardy? I loved him. I have always loved and will always love him. A flash of anger ran through me. Damn men and their egos, their damn pride. Yes, I broke my wedding vows, but only in the physical sense. My heart and mind still belong to Johnny. How can I make him understand that? This is the only thing that matters, not a drop of sweaty fluid exchange. Of course, I gave in to temptation, but just as this course will benefit us financially in the long run, my fall from grace will benefit our sex life. Can't he see that? He'll finally have the vibrant, uninhibited sex life he's been craving for years. I rolled over and saw Johnny's deodorant on the bedside table. He forgot it in his haste to leave. I leaned over and picked it up, bringing it to my face to smell it. The familiar smell brought tears to my eyes. I closed them and buried my face in the pillow, trying to erase the image of his shocked and pained face. I hurt him. This was never my intention, but despite that, I hurt him anyway. And for this, I felt deep regret. Clutching the deodorant to my chest, I tried to focus on the positives. I hadn't heard from any of our children. I hoped that meant Johnny didn't tell them anything. He also didn't yell at me or call me names. That should be a good sign, right? I sat up straight. What if the reason Johnny was dodging my calls and not calling the kids was because he was too busy meeting with lawyers, changing locks, and emptying bank accounts? What if his calm voice on the phone was him hiding his need to destroy me? To destroy our marriage? I jumped out of bed and rushed to the living room where I'd left my laptop. I grabbed it and returned to the room. My ears were pounding as I waited for it to load. It seemed like an eternity had passed. With trembling fingers, I logged into our bank account. I leaned my elbows on the pillows. The tears streaming down my cheeks were suddenly tears of relief. Johnny hadn't touched the money. I wiped my tears with a corner of the bedsheet. I was about to leave the bank website when suddenly a voice in my head spoke up. Just because Johnny hasn't emptied his accounts doesn't mean he won't. I didn't want to risk any backlash from him, but I also needed to protect myself. So I transferred a small amount to an older account in my name, enough to pay for plane tickets, food, essentials. I intended to log out of my laptop, but the small messenger icon showed that there were messages for me. My curiosity overcame my intentions. I clicked on them, and there it was. Doug. Gorgeous 25-year-old Doug. Doug was too old to date my daughters, but he was messaging me, a 48-year-old married mother. More tears streamed down my cheeks, tears of disappointment and melancholy. Despite everything that had happened, I really wanted to call him. I wanted to hear him tell me again how sexy I was. I longed to see in his face and body his need for me. I cursed the young man who started all of this. The first time I was taken advantage of was after I drank too much while trying to fit in with my younger classmates. But it was good, really good, and then I couldn't stop. I wanted it again and again. I wanted lust. I wanted to see admiration and desire in their eyes. I wanted to hear over and over again that I was the best they'd ever had. I wanted to feel that power again, this power that was so addictive. I was at war with myself. I knew that if I answered Doug's messages, he would come to me, and I wanted this. I whimpered. The sound that came out of me snapped me back to reality, and I suddenly felt disgusted with myself. I clenched my fist and pressed it to my lips. I should have resisted. If I gave in again, and Johnny decided to come back, or somehow found out that I was still... it could mean the end of my marriage. I rolled over onto my stomach, causing the laptop to slide off the bed. It fell to the floor with a crash, but I didn't care. I cried over my loss. There will be a price to pay to save my marriage. I must never give in to my addiction again. I must have fallen asleep, because the next moment sunlight streamed through the window. Feeling terrible, I trudged into the bathroom to take a shower. Sometime later, I inserted my key into the lock. I turned it, and it worked. I bowed my head in relief, releasing the breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. Johnny hadn't changed the locks. Another good sign. He hadn't emptied the bank accounts, hadn't informed our kids, hadn't served me with divorce papers. It's Thursday, so he's had plenty of time to inform and prepare them. And yet, my keys still work. Johnny will forgive me. It may take time, but he will forgive me. I was filled with love. He's such a good person. The best. And he loves me. He will find a way to let go, to come to terms with this, and we will move on with our lives. We will both pay a price for this. Johnny will always know that I found pleasure with another man, and I will probably never be able to leave the house without him again. One of the many compromises I am willing to make. This may seem a high price, but it is worth paying. I opened the door, expecting to find the house in disarray. Johnny's 3+ months of singleness were bound to have created a huge mess. But as I step inside and take a look around, I see I'm mistaken. All is clear. Everything is neat. At least in the living room. I walk into the kitchen and the dining room. It's the same there. Spotless, clean, even dusted. Was he cleaning here in preparation for my return? If yes, then this is another good sign. But where is he? It's 6:30 in the evening. He should be home from work, ready for his dinner. I walked over to the stove and ran my hand over the burners. They were stone cold. I checked the refrigerator. It had everything, fully stocked. including a plate of fried chicken and vegetables wrapped in plastic. Had he really cooked something like that in the microwave for dinner? There are no dishes in the sink. Had he washed and dried everything, or had he been eating out? I thought about calling or texting him, but after our only conversation on Tuesday, I was reluctant, not feeling any comfort or reassurance at the thought of what he could say to me. He hadn't come to pick me up from the airport, even though I'd sent him an SMS with flight information. I filled the kettle, ready to drink a much-needed cup of tea. While I waited for it to boil, I thought about the contradictory signs Johnny seemed to be giving me. On the one hand, he did nothing that I could associate to him deciding to end our marriage, but at the same time, he ignored my voicemails and text messages and didn't meet me at the airport. Maybe he's just being petty and wants to punish me. After making tea, I sat down at my usual place at our table. I looked at the table and the empty chairs surrounding it. So many family dinners have been observed at this very dining table. I smiled, remembering the lively discussions and banter exchanged. We may not have been rich financially, but we certainly were rich when it came to love and happiness. I was touched by these memories. Johnny will remember them too, and he's such a softie. When it comes to the kids, he wouldn't want them to have to choose or divide their time between us. For this reason alone, he will find a way to forgive me. But the question remains, where is he? Leaving the cup of tea on the table, I climbed the stairs and walked along the corridor to our bedroom. The signs suggested he was still at least living in the house. There was still a slight warmth in our bathroom. Once again, I was struck by the cleanliness. It's not that Johnny was a slob, but I thought that without my presence, he would go back to being a stereotypical guy and not clean up after himself. Deep in thought, I returned to the dining room. I sat and continued sipping my tea. Where is he? Where could he have gone? My stomach growled. I was hungry. I went to the fridge. Could Johnny have saved the chicken dinner for me? I lifted the edge of the wrapper and sniffed it. It smelled delicious. I put the plate in the microwave, set it, and sat down at the table while I waited for the beep telling me it was ready. It bothered me that I had no idea where my husband was. I replayed our conversations over the past 16 weeks. What did Johnny say he did to entertain himself? I was able to remember surprisingly little. I looked around the room again. It's not like he spends his nights at home. At this thought, a feeling of anxiety bloomed in my stomach. Johnny never did boys' nights or weekend fishing trips. He has always been a family man. Has this changed during my absence? The edges of my consciousness were teased by a vague memory of a name Johnny had mentioned in the first few weeks of the course. What was it? Michael? Matthew? Martin? I had a feeling that the name began with an M, but all the options that I came up with didn't evoke any flickers of recognition. And then it hit me. Marcus! Marcus, whose last name I couldn't remember. I rushed to the sideboard where we kept an old notebook. It was ancient, dating back to a time when we were too lazy to save numbers in our cell phones. Page after page I leafed through, looking for the name Marcus until I finally found it under the letter S. Marcus Stockwell. And beside it, a cell phone number was written. I hoped it was the same Marcus. I entered the number into my phone. It rang a few times, then went to voicemail. In frustration, I slammed my fist onto the table. Is nothing going to work out in my favour? The beep of the microwave, reminding me that I hadn't removed the reheated leftovers, startled me. I completely forgot about food. I decided to eat my dinner, using the time to think about what I would say when I finally got through to Marcus. Surprisingly, the meal turned out to be more delicious than I'd expected. Once my relationship with Johnny gets better, I'll have to encourage him to cook more often. Still chewing the last bite, I collected my plate and cutlery and took them to the sink. Now that it was time for my second attempt at calling Marcus, I was nervous. What if Johnny had told him? I remember that Marcus was pretty forward, blunt, and brutally honest. What if he came at me? I sighed, realizing that I would have to risk it, and come what may. Having made my decision, I opened my call log and pressed redial for Marcus' number. He answered after the third ring. Hello? There was a question in his greeting. Hi Marcus, this is Vicky Underhill. I was wondering if you knew where Johnny was. There was a long pause, and I held my breath, hoping he wouldn't hang up. His silence allowed the background noise to break through. He was clearly somewhere where other people had gathered. "Hello, Vicky. Long time no see." "It has been, yeah. And how have you been? How have I paused, trying to pull the name of Marcus' wife from the depths of my mind. "How have Jill and the children been?" "Well, Jane is fine," he replied, emphasizing his wife's name. I shuddered. Now was not the time to get her name wrong and potentially offend her husband. "Everything's great with all of us. And how are things with you? Been up to anything interesting lately?" I caught the tone of Marcus' last question. He knew. Things just keep getting better and better. Is Johnny with you?" "Yes, he's with me." "Okay, and where are you?" "With friends at a dart competition." I clenched my teeth, holding back a sarcastic response. Marcus knew that I wanted to know where my husband was. It was clear that he was going to make sure that giving me this information would be like pulling teeth. "Oh, that sounds wonderful. Where's the competition being held?" "At the pub." "Okay, which pub?" "At my local." I closed my eyes and bit my tongue. Damn smart ass. "And what's the name of your local?" I asked, trying to maintain a pleasant tone. "The Royal." Not wanting to give him the satisfaction of asking for the address, I thanked him, at which he gave his parting words, spoken with causticity, infuriating me. "Anything for the better half." Sarcastic freak. I opened my internet browser and typed the Royal into Google. It turned out that there were several pubs by that name. The Royal Hand, the Royal Arms, the Royal Oak. Asshole. It took me another 10 minutes of visiting each pub's website to discover that the Royal Oak was hosting a couples darts competition. I grabbed my bag, stopping in the hallway only to check that my hair and makeup were still in order. I wasn't a total mess, but wasn't exactly all together either. I frowned at my reflection, rummaging through my bag for my makeup and comb. 5 minutes later, I was in decent shape and was already walking out the door, throwing my bag into the passenger seat of my Toyota. I started the engine, and while I waited for the garage door to open, I entered the address of the Royal Oak into the GPS. Fortunately, it wasn't too far away, although this did little to assuage my patience and my nerves, which were stretched to the limit. I was relieved to discover that the pub had its own car park, although there weren't many spaces available. Couples darts competitions must be popular. Just as the thought occurred to me, I paused. Couples competition? What was Johnny doing at a dart competition for couples? Was he there to cheer on Marcus and Jane? I swallowed my anxiety and headed toward the entrance. I followed the noise, which led me into a room lined with tables. There were 2 dartboards set up against the far wall, and the game was in full swing. I looked around the room and found Johnny on the left. His face was turned towards one of the dart games, and an attractive blonde sat next to him. She didn't follow the game, but watched the entrance, and then she caught sight of me. The look on her face said it all. She knows. A warmth crept up my neck. I felt it spreading across my face. I watched as she lightly squeezed Johnny's hand. He turned and looked straight at me. I don't know what I expected. Pain, grief, anger, the look of a man who hasn't been able to sleep. Whatever I expected, I was disappointed. He looked the same as always. I think that's what made me freeze in place. My gaze was riveted on him. I couldn't tear it away. It was like tunnel vision. I saw the blonde squeeze his hand again. My heart sank as I saw Johnny place his hand over hers and pat it reassuringly. This gesture spoke of acquaintance, of friendship, of caring. And then Johnny disappeared, blocked from my prying eyes by the broad shoulders of a man that was suddenly standing in my personal space. I took a step back, not recognizing him until he spoke. "Hello, Vicky." "Oh, Marcus, hello," I stammered. "I came looking for Johnny. I had hoped all was well with him. Well, I mean, I know he must have been upset after, well, after he came back from visiting me. I hope this didn't cause you and Jane too much stress? Everything was fine with him, even excellent. This confused me. How can he be okay after... I couldn't finish the sentence. After finding out that you've been cheating on him behind his back for the last 4 months. The heat in my cheeks intensified. They seemed to be on fire. Whether I was guilty or not, it was bad form on his part to voice my indiscretion. I gave him a withering look, wishing I had the opportunity to turn him into a pile of ash. Then he laughed at me. My rage grew and I clenched my fists. Yes, but it's none of your business. I highly doubt things are as great with Johnny as you say. We've been married 28 years and he loves me. I know he must be devastated. I'm sure he's just hiding it so as not to make you feel awkward and uncomfortable. Well, then he must be a pretty good actor, because you could have fooled me. I had to agree, looking over Marcus' shoulder. I realized that Johnny was doing a great job of looking unconcerned. He and the blonde stood in front of one of the dartboards, with Johnny preparing to throw the first dart. It looked like the blonde was his partner. I didn't like this. I didn't like this one little bit. For all my dependence on men young enough to be my sons, I was not blind to their attributes. They were like meringues. Light, sweet, tasty, but ultimately unsatisfying as a meal. Like sugar, they have no substance. Johnny, on the other hand, was a premium steak, best eaten slowly to savour the flavour. Who's this woman? I hated being forced to ask, but the need to know overrode my reluctance to reveal my vulnerability. Marcus turned his head to look at Johnny and the blonde and smiled. Ah, that's Angela! Once again, Marcus was being infuriating, answering only my direct question and not offering anything additional. Okay, is she here with anyone? Is she married? I hoped that by asking 2 questions at once, I'd receive 2 answers. Yes and no. I was tired and stressed, which made it even harder than usual for me to remain patient. So yes, she's here with someone, but no, she's not married. Yes. The anxiety inside me grew, and part of me wanted to walk away and not ask the next logical question. I was almost certain that I wasn't going to like the answer. Who is she here with, Marcus? Marcus looked me in the eye, and with a curt grin stated, She's here with Johnny. Despite mentally preparing myself, I backed away as if I'd been slapped. Well, it didn't take him long, I muttered, the pain nullifying my verbal filter. On the contrary, Marcus said, his eyes like lasers burning a hole right into me. He had 4 months to get used to being alone. He looked again at Johnny and the blonde and smiled. I think he took to it like a duck takes to water. He looked at me and his smile disappeared. His tone cut me like a knife. But then again, so did you.
Oh, cheer, Doc! I didn't think we were going to see things from her point of view, eh? I didn't see that one coming at all. Oh, cowboy, Doc!
Indeed, William. I do enjoy stories that show multiple perspectives on such situations. It does keep things what word am I looking for?
Fresh, Doc! It keeps things fresh!
Yes, William. As fresh as apples in autumn. Now, I do believe we're into the final part of the story, so let's quickly get back to it so that we can offer our final words.
Oh yeah, final stretch, Doc, to make it. I'm stoked. Let's do it, Artie.
Very good, William.
Oh, just Willie, bro.
Very good. 8 years later. It's been 8 years since Johnny divorced me, and not a day goes by that I don't regret the actions that led to our separation. Of course, when it became clear that reconciliation was impossible, I was given the opportunity to indulge my addiction, and it was a hollow victory. It didn't take me long to realize that a constant sugar diet was ultimately unsatisfying, and the law of diminishing returns was at work. I spent 8 years searching for that elusive first high. If only I had realized then that I was doomed to fail. I try not to think about my list of hobbies, and how that list is getting shorter and shorter, and the duration of each hobby even less so. Do I really want to think about other forbidden boundaries that I crossed? I was once a reserved lover, afraid that if I showed too much pleasure, my husband would think I was a slut and lose respect for me. I've now had more lovers than I can count on my fingers and toes, and countless more times I did things that I pray my children never find out about. My relationship with them is already fragile. Looking around the kitchen and dining room, I feel despair. Without Johnny, these rooms seem empty. He brought warmth and laughter. Now they're silent. They were once part of a home, but now they're just part of a house. I guess I should consider myself lucky that Johnny agreed to sell me his share of the house for less than market value, especially since I never returned to finish my course and remain a general nurse to this very day. But it's hard to feel lucky when I know what lies behind his generosity. Angela. That damn Angela was rich, and she wanted Johnny with or without money. I knew for sure that they had now set off on a trip around the world. Scotland, Venice, Florence, the Greek islands, all of it. I knew because they paid for all the children, hers and his, and the grandchildren, to meet them in Hawaii in a few weeks. This meant that I would spend Christmas alone again. I looked at my watch. It's time to go to work. I packed my bag and headed to the front door out of habit. I looked at my reflection in the mirror and winced. I'm 56 and age is rapidly catching up with me. It's getting harder and harder to attract young guys. In truth, the young guys aren't that young anymore. They're no longer 20, but 30 and even 40. I sigh in resignation. What else could I do? There are few men of my age who are suitable for marriage. At least the good ones, and whether they're good or bad, no one wants to marry me. My reputation precedes me. The only option would be to move to the other side of the country and start over, but that would mean moving away from my children, and I don't see them enough as it is, let alone if there were an entire continent between us. While Johnny and his damn Angela were probably kicking back and sipping Mai Tais, I was changing beddings and inserting thermometers. I'll end my days as a general nurse, having destroyed both my marriage and my career. And for what? For nothing. For the taste of sugar. Sweet but bitter sugar. I blinked away tears of self-pity. Why cry? Nobody cares.
My, that one is still one of my favourite stories ever. As they say, the classics are always the best. Now, William, would you like to offer your final thoughts on the story we've just heard?
Oh, kia ora, Doc. Well, after all said and done, I feel like relationships should really be worked on, eh? A lot of people think that it's hard work, but honestly, I believe that it can be a lot of fun as well, you know? I always believe that honesty is the best policy, especially with someone who should be your best friend over everything else, eh?
Jolly good, William. I could not have said it better myself, old chap. And if I may add, if one is truly dissatisfied in one's situation in life, then as you have stated, honesty may really be the best policy. For I do believe it is better to end one journey in order to start a new one, rather than trying to follow two incompatible paths that may lead to more pain and heartache. Having your cake and eating it too, I do believe that is called.
Oh, I don't mind cake, Doc, but I do prefer steamed pudding and custard.
Oh, that does sound delightful, William. But unfortunately, we've come to the end of our session for today.
Oh, all good, Doc. Well, kia ora for joining us today, cuzzies. Hope to see you fellas again, eh? Ka kite.
Quite right. We do indeed hope to see you again for another session very soon. Until next time, ladies and gentlemen, cheerio.